I was going to just read little pieces of this book I have has quotes, and you can find these quotes online if you start digging. We have quotes from starting somewhere like in the mid to late first century. There was what's the name? I don't know if it was Clement of Alexandria or somebody else. There's a known one that was, he was in the mid late first century, and then by the time the second, third century came in, you have quite a few of them. Fourth, fifth, you have quite a few of them that you have writings from, just like we have manuscripts, thousands of them for the New Testament. We also have a bunch of quotes that can be looked at, that can be found and dug up, and they exist. But it's pretty obvious once you start looking into the history of what happened. What section should I start? Constantine. Motive of Constantine for legislating Sunday as a day of rest, and stresses the general importance of the sun god, sun, from now on, the sun in the sky, in the empire. Indeed, this god was titulary divinity of Constantine's family, and from the 4th century there is an increasing assimilation of Christ to the sun god as son of righteousness, sun, the Christos Helios, and the notable mosaic of Christos Helios recently uncovered in the tomb of the Julii under the Vatican. But this theme of Christ the true Son had already been diffusely proclaimed by Clement of Alexandria, 150 to 215. In many of his writings, Origen followed in the footsteps of Clement, his teacher, and proclaimed our Savior to be the Son, sun, the true Son, sun. These church fathers were heretics. Cyprian also called, what people do, I think, is some Christians that are aware, most aren't, but some are, about the church fathers, and they use their quotes to prove certain doctrines or whatever. They quote like whatever they are looking for, something that sounds good. They never dig in to who these people really were, because there's plenty of quotes from them that they all believed in the sun in the sky. So Clement, the teacher of Origen, these guys early in the mid first century to late first century and in the 200s were referencing to the sun, sun. Their quotes can be found, and I'm reading some of them. Cyprian also called our Savior the true Son because of this. Bishop Zeno of Verona elaborated at great length on Christ the Son as the true Son, as the eternal Son, sun. Some might say that Helios also means the sun as the physical sun, but all encyclopedias affirm that in religion Helios means the sun deity. The assimilation of our Savior to the sun deity was not difficult, for the pagans of the Roman Empire were steeped in sun worship, and they referred to their sun deity as their Lord, or Kurios. Helios, the sun deity, was called the Lord, Kurios, of the heaven and the earth. Indeed, certain historians have felt that sun worship has already given Sunday the name Lord's Day. Pava writes, the first day of each week, Sunday, was consecrated to Mithra since times remote, as several authors affirm, because the sun was God, the Lord par excellence. Sunday came to be called the Lord's Day, as later was done by Christianity. Our Savior was called Lord, Kurios, and the sun deity was also called Lord par excellence. So the name titles being easy to unite, it made it easier to identify our Savior's day with the day of the sun deity. Thus, civically, the venerable day of the sun was legislated to be the rest day, It now only remained for the church to fall in line with the civil law of Constantine, who, although being a sun worshiper, had already showed some affinity towards Christians, especially by ending their persecution. Yeah, so the true believers were getting persecuted up to the time of Constantine. He stopped it, and then it started again not too long later, and was going on ever since. These true believers practically didn't exist after the first century. They were wiped out. This change over to Sunday by the change, because they knew the quotes. You can read hundreds of quotes from the Romans, from the church fathers. They changed the day that long after the Messiah was risen and into the first century and mid first century, there were people, a few believers, that were still keeping the Sabbath day. All right, it was being done still, because it never went away. And this is the history on what they did. It's not that hard to understand. This change over to Sunday by the church took place in the year 336. Some authorities give the date as 364 at the Council of Laodicea. Canon 29, Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath, which would have been our Saturday today, because it didn't change. The calendar didn't change the day since then. But must work on that day, honoring rather the Lord's Day, which I just read was referred to as the sun, S-U-N day, the sun deity. And Clement and Origen and all these other people worshipped the sun, but must work on that day, honoring rather the Lord's Day by resting, if possible, as Christians. However, if any shall be found Judaizing, that's the common phrase they use, the early church fathers, towards the true believers. They hated them with vicious passion. You should read some of this stuff. It's brutal what they did the first few centuries and into the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. It's brutal. Christians are some of the most bloody people on earth from our history. If possible, as Christians, however, if any shall be found Judaizing, let them be shut out of Christ. Bishop Eusebius, 270 to 338 CE, who worked with Constantine, admits the church's decision to change from Sabbath to Sunday. So part of the purpose of this video is to show you that they knew there was still a day of rest. It wasn't like every day just spiritual. I rest every day spiritually. The history proves that that even the church fathers knew that there was a day of rest still in the 300s, in the 200s. And what they were doing is wiping out any of the remains of true believers and shutting them out. Like it just says, let them be shut out of Christ. Of course, the name Christ, the name was already changed by then. Nobody called him Christ when he was alive. You know, that same word, nobody did. If possible, as Christians, however, if any shall be found Judaizing, let them be shut out. Admits the church's decision to change from Sabbath to Sunday. All things whatsoever that it was duty to do on the Sabbath, these we have transferred to the Lord's Day. They transferred it. These are their quotes. Eusebius' commentary on the Psalms, quoted by Moses Stewart, commentary on the Apocalypse, volume 2, 940. The church had succumbed. The merger was virtually accomplished. The unconquered sun, S-U-N, the sun deity, was proving the merits of its name. It was invincible. With the accession of the Severan dynasty, sun worship had become dominant in Rome. The sun as deity was a superb symbol and rallying point for the empire. The unconquered sun had taken over the role of Jupiter, the great sky god, as protector of Rome and of the empire. Upon the sun were bestowed as many attributes and symbols and names of gods or goddesses as possible. Serapis, the great deity of Alexandria, as well as Mithras and Attis, were all identified with the sun, whom philosophers like Pliny and Macrobius declared to be the one supreme God concealed behind the innumerable lesser deities of the Greco-Roman pantheon. Even the Christians could not hold out against the flood and the marks of the compromise to which the Catholic Church came in the matter way, perhaps by seeing in the coincidence of the Lord's Day with Sunday. It is certainly by no accident that the emperors whose reigns immediately preceded the establishment of Christianity all turned towards the worship of the sun god, who was looked upon as the peculiar divinity of the family to which Constantine belonged. The great scholarly and honest Roman Catholic theologian, Dr. F. J. Dulger, wrote, I translate, in his Sunday law edict, Constantine probably instituted the meaning of the familiar usage Sunday without far-reaching intent. The expression could be used without causing offense among the pagans of his portion of the empire. Since the days of Emperor Aurelian in the second half of the 3rd century, the sun god cult, under the title of Sol Invictus, i.e. unconquered sun, had experienced a tremendous furtherance in the hands of the state. Other pagan cult groups of that time also likened their supreme deity to the sun god or completely equated it to the sun god. Attis was a light deity. Osiris, too, was sun god. Baal Hammon of Carthage was sun Baal. Jupiter, Onxer of Terracina, and Jupiter of Doliche and Hillipoli were all sun god. Sabazius had become one with the sun gods, and the Persian sun god Mithras had instituted a missionary campaign as no other religion next to Christianity. For all these religions, fellowships, the imperial Sunday law edict meant a privilege. They all felt themselves honored when Sunday was especially festively dedicated to their deity, the sun. The unconquered sun, which had conquered all other religions, had finally conquered its last major rival, Christianity, by joining it, by being fused with it. The messianic belief, being united with all the sun-worshipping cults, was to become one strong body which gradually would overrun, assimilate, and syncretize all remaining obstacles, either by force or by assimilation and compromise. The many half-Christian and mostly sun-worshipping Gnostic sects heavily leaned towards allegorization and Neoplatonism, had already influenced the infiltrated the Christianity of Alexandria and of Rome. Clement of Alexandrian origin had already been quoting freely from the books of the Gnostics, Valentinus and Heracleon. Irenaeus, Tertullian, and Hippolytus later on also did likewise with the writings of Valentinus and Ptolemy. Already in the year 124, Emperor Hadrian wrote from Alexandria on his visit there the following in a letter: those who worship Serapis are Christians, and those who call themselves bishops of Christ are vowed to Serapis. Serapis being the sun deity of Alexandria. I don't know how much more I need to read. But there's a lot more about this than just what I wrote or read. It just gets worse and worse from there. So all these denominations come from the church fathers. And some of them who look into these things gladly say that, yeah, the church fathers said such and such. You know, we had this tradition since way back then. Yeah, your tradition all has to do with sun worship and false deities. That's who all these people were. That's who all the church fathers were. Every single one of them that were with this church system were against what they called the Judaizers, the true believers. So if there is a church father, he hated the true believers. They were heretics, all of them, every single one of them. There was not a single believer since then in that whole church system. Not one. Not one. If there were a few believers from that time on, they were very few, and they were scattered just here and there. So 1,500 years, basically, practically none. The whole entire church world dominated, and every single one of those people in the church world and all its divisions were heretics. Martin Luther and John Calvin and all these other heroes were heretics because they came from those 200, 300 AD times of sun worship. It doesn't matter what they say about Christ or whatever. They were all pagan worshipers, and they all hated the true way and the true people. They did everything they can to snuff them out. If you want to read about some of the blood and gore, maybe you should, on what they did to them during that whole time period. Maybe you should read what the Christians did to the Judaizers, and how they butchered them and burned them and got rid of them completely. I think the point of the video has been made. Don't ignore it.